I thought we had it all, a perfect marriage, a happy family, and a future I could count on. But one text message and 12 years of secrets shattered everything I believed in, leaving me to pick up the pieces and uncover the truth. Reflecting on the moment my life took an unexpected turn still feels surreal, even though the signs were always there in hindsight. I had always prided myself on being a dependable, trustworthy person, someone who put family above everything else. Like anyone, I had moments of insecurity and self-doubt, but I held fast to the belief that my loyalty would be returned. Perhaps I was naive, or maybe I just wanted so desperately to believe that my family life was as solid as I had imagined. And yet, there were nights I lay awake, troubled by questions I couldn't bring myself to confront. Rachel's sudden absences, her extended work trips, and the subtle changes in her behavior all lingered at the back of my mind. I brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just stress from her job. But deep down, unease gnawed at me. The day I decided to hire Greg Sanders, a private investigator, I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to shift. Guilt and dread loomed over me as I took that step, a decision that would dismantle the calm I'd fought to maintain. I never pictured myself as someone who would spy on his own wife, but the creeping fear had grown too large to ignore. It had woven itself into every part of my life. When I sat in Greg's office, clutching an envelope that held the truth, my stomach twisted with dread. His words only deepened the storm brewing in my chest. "I hate to bring you bad news, Mr. Carter," Greg said, sliding the envelope across the desk. Inside were documents, photographs, and a DVD that chronicled Rachel's affair with her former boss, Daniel Harris. Though I had glimpsed a few of the photos before, I hadn't yet summoned the courage to view the video evidence. The weight of knowing the truth, and not wanting to, kept my fingers from reaching for it. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice strained as I avoided Greg's eyes. Greg opened his report, scanning the notes before replying. "Based on the transcripts, it's been at least 10 years, possibly 12. It appears to have started when she was working toward that big promotion." The words hit me like a freight train. 10 years. A decade of betrayal. The timing placed it just a year after our son Liam was born, a time I thought we were strengthening the foundation of our lives together. The world I had built, or thought I had, was now crumbling around me. I realized I needed to get a DNA test to confirm if Liam and Sophie were truly mine. The thought churned my stomach, but another grim possibility struck me. What about sexually transmitted diseases? The weight of the question settled heavily on me as I voiced it to Greg. His report revealed that Daniel, along with Rachel, had also been involved with several other married women over the years. How could she expose me to that risk without a second thought? I knew I needed to get tested as soon as possible. As I glanced through the report again, I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh at Greg's summary that Rachel appeared blissfully unaware of Daniel's escapades when he wasn't with her. What a tragic irony. "If it's any consolation, Mr. Carter," Greg added carefully, "her lover explicitly stated he had no intention of breaking up your marriage. All he wanted was, well, her body." He paused, his eyes studying my reaction. "And, for what it's worth, they never brought any of this into your home." The words hit like a dull thud. At least my own bed hadn't been sullied by Daniel's presence, but the thought brought no comfort. "No, that's no consolation at all, Mr. Sanders," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But thank you for telling me." I had met Daniel Harris a few times before, and I never liked him. He was the type some might call attractive, tall, charming, with a polished smile that masked the arrogance simmering just below the surface. That smug, self-satisfied smirk of his had driven me crazy more than once. Now I understood the reason behind it, and my anger burned hotter. "There's more, Mr. Carter," Greg said, his tone growing heavier. "From what we've uncovered, Daniel's sister, Natalie, was aware of the affair from the beginning. In fact, she may have even helped them carry it out." The betrayal hit like a second wave. Natalie had always seemed kind-hearted, the complete opposite of her brother. I had even trusted her to babysit Liam a few times. Now I felt like a fool for not seeing through her. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath. Just, unbelievable. Have you spoken to an attorney yet? Greg asked gently. Not yet, I replied. I wanted to know the full truth before making any decisions. Well, I work closely with Lisa Hawkins, he said. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in the field, and she has no tolerance for people who break vows. If you'd like, I can send her this file and let her know to expect a call from you. That would be great, I said, my voice firm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Thank you. I took the business card Greg handed me and slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the raised print as if trying to ground myself in the moment. Greg hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his tone more personal this time. Can I offer some advice? Of course, I said, nodding. Let Lisa handle it, he suggested gently. I know you're hurting, and right now, you probably feel like lashing out. But trust me, it's not worth risking jail time or jeopardizing your future. You've got 2 kids who need you. His voice softened as he added, they're what matter most. He was right. The kids were the only bright spots in this nightmare. I understand, I replied, my voice barely steady. Thank you, Greg. I paid the bill and left his office, each step feeling heavier than the last. It was as though the weight of my broken marriage pressed down on my shoulders, threatening to collapse me entirely. The pain was unbearable, but I knew Greg was right. I couldn't afford to lose control, not with Liam and Sophie depending on me. Sitting in my car, I finally let go. Tears spilled freely as the magnitude of everything sank in. My entire marriage had been a lie. I thought I'd been building something solid, something lasting, but it had all been a house of cards. The man Rachel had once loved, or so I thought, was no more than a placeholder for her real desires. When I finally composed myself, I pulled out the card Greg had given me. Lisa Hawkins. Divorce attorney. I stared at the name for a moment, then dialed her office. Her assistant answered, professional but warm, and I managed to schedule an appointment for the following day. Before hanging up, the assistant provided me with a list of documents to bring, a tangible step in what was sure to be a long and painful process. On the way home, I stopped at a convenience store. As if on autopilot, I grabbed a pack of cigarettes. It was a habit I'd kicked back in college, but tonight felt like an exception. A crutch. I just needed something to dull the pain. With the cigarettes in my pocket, I made another stop, at a nearby bar. I wasn't much of a drinker, but tonight, the idea of drowning my sorrows felt justified. Seated at the bar, I nursed a beer and took a drag from a cigarette, the bitterness of both mingling with my thoughts. A bartender, a man about my age with a tired yet kind expression, wandered over. You okay, buddy? He asked, his voice cutting through the haze of my despair. I looked up, surprised by his question. Is it that obvious? Afraid so, he said, offering a faint smile. Let me guess, you just found out your wife's been unfaithful. I let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, pretty much. 12 years, if you can believe it. I can believe it, he said, shaking his head. I've seen and heard just about everything working here. I bet, I muttered, taking another sip of beer. He chuckled softly before continuing, mind if I share something my granddad used to say? Go ahead, I said, curiosity sparking despite myself. He leaned closer, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret. I once felt sorry for myself for not having shoes, then I met a man with no feet. The words settled over me, their weight both comforting and sobering. I nodded, appreciating the sentiment even as I grappled with my own pain. As I sat there, replaying the past in my mind, new pieces fell into place. Little things I'd noticed over the years but never dared to question. Like after Sophie was born, I'd had a vasectomy. Yet Rachel had insisted on staying on birth control. When I'd asked about it, she brushed it off, saying it was to regulate her periods and be extra cautious. At the time, it had seemed odd but harmless. Now, in light of what I knew, those memories carried a dark, bitter clarity. The cracks in my life had always been there. I'd just been too blind, or too trusting, to see them. The pieces I had ignored for so long began to fall into place. I remembered calling Rachel during one of her many work trips. She was always in her hotel room when I called, at least, that's what she claimed, but sometimes I thought I could hear muffled voices in the background. I dismissed it then, too trusting, too afraid to believe otherwise. One memory stood out sharply now. It was a quiet evening at home, the kids already in bed. Rachel had just hung up the phone after a long call. She turned to me, her voice soft. "Nathan, I feel like I'm not much company tonight. Is there anything I can do for you, honey?" 1,000 responses bubbled to the surface, but none came out. Yes, I thought bitterly, but it's too late for that. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "I'm afraid there's nothing you can do." She paused, seemingly unsure of how to respond, before saying, "Oh, by the way, Nathan, I'll be out of town this weekend, starting Friday." "It's only Tuesday, and you're already telling me you'll be gone?" I replied, my voice tinged with sarcasm. "Yes," she said, brushing it off casually. "Something's come up, it's just business, you know." "Sure," I muttered, bitterness lacing the single word. "And what about Sophie's birthday on Saturday?" "I know," Rachel replied, her tone strained. "But this is important. I'll make it up to her." I didn't respond, choosing instead to retreat to my home office. I shut the door and locked it, needing space to think. Moments later, I heard Rachel trying the handle, followed by a soft knock. "Nathan," she called, her voice hesitant, almost pleading. "Please, can we talk?" "Leave it alone, Rachel," I said through clenched teeth. "I'm busy." There was a long pause before I heard her footsteps fade away. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply, before turning my attention to the files Greg had given me. I started organizing everything Lisa would need for our meeting. The weight of the evidence was suffocating. Among the reports and photos was the DVD, the one I still couldn't bring myself to watch. My hands shook as I picked it up, the case cold and unyielding in my grip. After a moment, I put it back in the drawer and locked it away. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Nathan?" Rachel's voice came through the door again, quieter this time, almost fragile. "What?" I snapped, the sharpness in my tone startling even myself. "Could you come say good night to the kids?" she asked. Her voice carried a tired vulnerability that cut through my anger, but I pushed it aside. "Fine," I replied curtly. "Just for a minute." I went upstairs and tucked Sophie into bed, doing my best to keep my expression neutral. Her big, innocent eyes looked up at me, filled with concern. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked softly. "Yes, honey," I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine. Now go to sleep. I love you." She hugged me tightly, her little arms providing a brief moment of solace. "I love you too, Dad," she whispered. I lingered for a moment after she closed her eyes, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Then I turned and left the room, retreating to the solitude of my office. Rachel was standing in the hallway, waiting for me. "Nathan," she began, tears streaming down her face. "Can we?" "I need time to think," I said, cutting her off. She hesitated, then nodded silently, turning and walking back to our bedroom. I stayed in the office, chain-smoking until well past midnight, before finally collapsing onto the futon. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by images and half-formed memories. The next morning, I got up early to make breakfast for the kids. Rachel lingered nearby, watching me with a mix of sadness and confusion, but I refused to acknowledge her. My focus was entirely on Liam and Sophie, ensuring they were ready for school. "Have a great day, okay?" I said as they grabbed their backpacks. They hugged me before heading out the door, their bright smiles momentarily pushing the storm in my mind to the side. Once the house was quiet again, Rachel spoke. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. But I couldn't face her, not yet. I turned my back and started cleaning up the kitchen. For now, the answers would have to wait. I went to work the next day without looking back. My resolve was hardening with each passing moment, and when I met with Lisa Hawkins that afternoon, I knew I had to secure as much as possible, especially custody of Liam and Sophie. "I want custody of my kids," I said firmly. Lisa leaned back in her chair, her pen tapping lightly on her desk. "In most cases, custody usually goes to the mother. But I've been their primary caregiver for years," I countered. "Even Rachel admits in those videos that I'm better with the kids. And let's not forget she's willing to miss Sophie's birthday just to be with her lover. Doesn't that count for something?" Lisa nodded. "It does. We can absolutely use that." She leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning through my financial documents, reviewing every detail carefully. "Your wife received a significant payout from her company recently. We'll want to include that in our calculations." "What about Natalie Harris?" I asked. "Daniel's sister knew about the affair and might have even helped them. Can we bring her into this?" Lisa pursed her lips thoughtfully. "It's a similar situation to your wife's. We can pursue her for contributing to emotional distress, though it might not carry significant weight. Still, if you want to, we can file something." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Let's do it. When can you formalize everything?" I pressed. "We'll be ready by Friday," Lisa assured me. "Perfect," I replied, my tone cold. "I want the papers served late Saturday night." "She'll be with Daniel then?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. A bit of shock and awe. "Exactly," I said. "Let her know what it feels like to have her world disrupted." She nodded. "We can arrange that." Later that evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the week's events, Rachel came to the door. "Did you talk to Sophie?" I asked sharply. "Yes," she said, her voice strained. "She's not thrilled, but she'll get over it. She's young." "Where are the kids now?" I asked. "In their rooms doing homework," she replied. I turned to face her, my tone hardening. "So you're still going on this trip with Daniel?" Her eyes narrowed, though she tried to maintain composure. "Yes, as I said, it's strictly business." "Business," I muttered. "Right. When do you plan to fully retire?" "I already am retired, Nathan," she snapped. "They just need my expertise now and then. It's not like I'm gone all the time." I didn't respond. I simply turned back to my desk, the conversation weighing heavier with every word. By Thursday evening, her attempts to reconcile shifted to manipulation. She appeared at the office door wearing a revealing nightgown I once adored. But knowing what she'd been doing with Daniel, I felt nothing but disgust. "Sorry, Rachel," I said softly. "I've got a terrible migraine. I'll take something and sleep here." A tear rolled down her cheek as she turned away, but I felt no sympathy. It was all part of the facade, and I was done falling for it. The next day, around noon, Rachel called to say she was leaving. "I hope you feel better," she said, her tone distant. After hanging up, I began packing. By the time Saturday arrived, I had gathered everything I wanted her to see. Into a large envelope, I placed a brief note, my wedding ring, and our torn marriage certificate. Each fragment of paper symbolized the irreparable damage she had caused. I sealed the envelope and handed it to one of the movers with explicit instructions. Deliver this to Rachel Carter at Daniel's house at exactly 5:30 p.m., I said, sliding two $50 bills into their hands as a tip for their trouble. They nodded, and I watched as the last pieces of my former life were loaded onto their truck. By the time evening fell, I felt a strange sense of relief. The Nathan Carter who had once believed in Rachel's love was gone. All that remained was a man ready to rebuild his life, for himself and for his children. "I'll take care of this personally, Mr. Carter," the young man assured me as he accepted the package. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm still brewing inside me. That evening, I reheated some leftover roast and ate in the living room, letting the hum of the TV fill the silence. It was a rare night of peace, as though a weight had been lifted knowing that Rachel's world would soon be turned upside down. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully in the master bedroom, alone. The next morning, my sister Rhonda called, her voice full of concern. "Nathan, you sounded tense on the phone yesterday. What's going on?" I hesitated, then decided it was time she knew. "Rachel's been having an affair with her former boss, Daniel Harris, for the past 12 years, I explained. "That's exactly what she's doing right now." "Oh my goodness," Rhonda gasped. "Are you certain about this?" "Yes, completely," I said. I'd suspected something for a while, so after her supposed retirement last month, I hired an investigator. I have his full report, photos, videos, everything. If you want to see them. "No," she interrupted. "That's all right. But Nathan, are you sure there's no chance of forgiving her?" "Not after all this time," I said firmly. Rhonda sighed. "I'd like to see that report, but only to understand everything. Still, you need to think about Liam and Sophie. They'll need you to be there for them through all of this." "I know," I replied, the weight of her words sinking in. "That's why I can't do anything reckless. I won't risk losing them." "You're probably right," she agreed after a thoughtful pause. "Still, from that report, it seems Daniel has a habit of going after married women. I wouldn't be surprised if Rachel wasn't his first." "Probably not," I admitted. Rhonda's husband, George, chimed in. "Listen, Nathan, why don't you let me handle that dirtbag? He's not worth you risking your future over. Don't worry, no one's going to jail." Though George was a big man with a no-nonsense demeanor, I shook my head. "I appreciate it, George, but I can't let anyone fight this battle for me." Later that afternoon, I hosted Sophie's birthday party, keeping up appearances for the sake of the kids. I greeted Denise, a family friend, and directed her to the backyard, where the celebration was in full swing. As I turned back, Natalie Harris, Daniel's sister, walked in with her husband, Ralph. I offered them drinks, forcing a polite smile. "I'm surprised to see you, Natalie. I thought you and the family had a big business trip this weekend." "That's all Daniel and Rachel's work," she replied with a dismissive wave. "I'm just the assistant back at the office." "Right," I said, my voice tight. Natalie glanced at my hand, her brows furrowing. "Nathan, is everything okay between you and Rachel? You're not wearing your wedding ring." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing." But I wasn't done. The facade I'd been keeping cracked under the weight of her audacity. "You acted like my friend all these years, Natalie," I said coldly. "How many times did you sit at my table, eating meals with my family, knowing full well what Rachel was doing with your brother? Did you enjoy seeing me played for a fool?" "Nathan, Thanks to you," I interrupted, my voice low but cutting, "my marriage and family are shattered. My children have lost their mother because of this, and I will never trust anyone the same way again." Natalie's face crumbled as she opened her mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away before she could say a word. "I hope you're pleased with yourself, Natalie," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "I'm not happy at all," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix 12 years of betrayal, I replied firmly. As Denise and Ralph lingered awkwardly nearby, I walked away, unwilling to spend another moment on Natalie's feeble apologies. Meanwhile, Rachel and Daniel were lying together in his bed when her phone chimed. Thinking it was a message from the party, Rachel reached over and picked it up. She read the text from Natalie. He knows everything. Oh no, she muttered under her breath. What's wrong? Daniel asked, sitting up slightly. It's Natalie, Rachel replied. Nathan knows everything. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, grabbing her robe. I'd better clean up and get home. Are you sure that's wise? Daniel asked cautiously. Yes, Rachel said firmly, tying her robe. At that moment, the doorbell rang. They exchanged stunned glances before Rachel quickly slipped out of the bedroom to answer it. A man dressed in jeans and a t-shirt stood on the doorstep, holding a paper bag with an envelope attached. Are you Rachel Carter? He asked. Yes, that's me, she replied, puzzled. He handed her the bag and said, I was asked to deliver this to you, ma'am. There are also a few more boxes in the truck. Where would you like them? Rachel turned to Daniel, who had followed her to the door. They exchanged a look before Daniel replied, just put them in the front room for now. Will do, the man said, heading back to the truck. Rachel closed the door and stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. She opened it and unfolded the note inside. As she read, her face drained of color. Rachel. For the sake of the kids, don't contest the divorce terms. But know that I'm fully prepared to fight if you do. I have photos, videos, and reports from a private investigator. I haven't told Liam and Sophie the reason for our divorce yet, but I will when the time is right. Your parents have seen the report, though not the photos. This sham of a marriage is over. Rachel, you are dead to me. Goodbye, Nathan. With tears streaming down her face, Rachel opened the paper bag. Inside, she found ashes, the remnants of her wedding veil, burned to cinders. Her hands shook as she tried to process the finality of it all. Meanwhile, back at home, I was tucking Sophie into bed. She hugged me tightly and whispered, Are you okay, Dad? I wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled softly. Everything will be okay, sweetheart, I assured her. Rhonda and George stayed after the party to help clean up. As they were leaving, Rhonda asked, Will you be all right, Nathan? Yes, I replied. Thank you for everything. After locking up, I went to bed and fell asleep almost immediately, the day's weight finally lifting. The following days passed smoothly. I made breakfast, mowed the lawn, and helped Liam trim the bushes. By lunchtime, Sophie was in the kitchen making sandwiches for us. Rhonda and George took turns picking up the kids from school and staying with them until I got home. Rhonda even cooked dinner for us a few nights, which was a big help. On Tuesday, Lisa Hawkins called with an update. Rachel wants to visit the kids, she said. The idea made me uneasy. I wasn't comfortable with her coming to the house, and I worried she might take them without permission. What about the restraining order? I asked. We could suspend it temporarily, from Friday evening to Sunday morning, Lisa suggested. It's important for the kids to see their mother. I hesitated but eventually agreed. Let's make it clear that the visits are supervised, I added. I'm not taking any chances. Lisa promised to finalize the details, and I hung up, hoping I was making the right choice. That evening, George picked me up, and we headed to Flat Stick Pub, a popular sports bar in town. Over burgers and beers, George filled me in on Rachel's visit with the kids. She arrived at 9 this morning, he began, his tone neutral. The kids weren't thrilled to see her and didn't hide it. She admitted to the affair, he added, surprising me. She admitted it? I asked, incredulous. Yeah. She says she still loves you, George continued. Do you think she'll try to reconcile? No chance, George, I replied without hesitation. After 12 years of lies, I'm done. George nodded in agreement. Just then, a server brought over another round of beers. The next morning, I was at home when Rachel arrived for her scheduled visit. Sophie ran into the living room, teary-eyed, and threw her arms around me. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. I kissed her forehead and forced a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine, sweetheart." Liam stood nearby, his face dark with emotion. "I heard you knocked out Daniel," he said, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Not something to be proud of," I replied, glancing at George, who was standing by the door. Rachel approached hesitantly, her expression a mix of shame and sadness. "Nathan," she said quietly, "can I speak with you alone for a few minutes?" The kids exchanged uneasy glances but eventually left the room. Rachel sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "You know," I began, my tone calm but firm, "you could have come to me. We could have fought this together. But no. You made your choice." Her eyes filled with tears. "I see that now. I wanted that job badly enough to do whatever it took, even if it meant destroying our family." Her voice cracked. "It was a deal with the devil. And now you're blaming the devil?" I scoffed. "Come on, Rachel. The truth is, you wanted that job enough to betray me and our family. You made the deal, and you knew what you were doing." She looked down, ashamed. "I guess I got to a point where I thought I could have it both ways," she admitted quietly. "So, you had feelings for him, didn't you?" I pressed. "That's why you kept it going for so long." Rachel hesitated before whispering, "Those are your words, not mine." "If the shoe fits," I said, shrugging. Her face paled, and after a long pause, she asked, "Did you really take a DNA test?" "Yes," I replied, watching her reaction closely. "Thankfully, both kids are mine." Rachel gasped, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, did you really think I'd go that far? After 12 years of lies and betrayal, can you blame me?" I asked, my tone sharp but controlled. She sat in silence, visibly shaken. Finally, she looked up and asked, "What do you want me to do now?" "Sign the papers, Rachel," I said firmly. "Let's end this sham of a marriage. Get help for yourself and focus on being there for the kids." Her eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever you need me to do," she whispered. As she left the room, Sophie came back in, her face full of hope. "Does this mean you and Mom are getting back together?" she asked softly. I crouched down to her level, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "But I promise, everything is going to be okay. I'm here for you, and I always will be." I shook my head gently and looked at Sophie. "No, honey," I said softly. "But you both love each other," she protested, her voice filled with confusion and hope. "For a marriage to be strong, Sophie, it takes more than love," I explained. "It takes trust. And right now, I don't have that with your mom. Someday, you'll understand." She nodded reluctantly, her young mind grappling with emotions far too heavy for her age. Later, the doctor came in, performed a final checkup, and discharged me. George drove me home with the kids, who sat quietly in the back seat. The silence was comforting, a moment to breathe after the whirlwind of the past weeks. Over the next few days, I focused on rebuilding our lives. I carefully managed the finances, ensuring we were stable, and began planning a Mediterranean cruise for next summer, something for Liam, Sophie, and me to look forward to. Meanwhile, Daniel Harris faced justice. He was convicted of aggravated assault and attempted homicide, thanks to the video evidence of his attack on me. The court sentenced him to 10 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8.5 years. I occasionally saw Rachel when I dropped the kids off at George and Rhonda's house. Sometimes, we exchanged a few words, but I could never shake the memory of her betrayal. She started seeing a psychologist, trying to make sense of her choices and their consequences. One afternoon, George stopped by with an expression I hadn't seen in years, serious and somber. "Nathan," he began gravely, "they're planning to admit Rachel to a mental hospital." My breath caught. "Why?" I asked, taken aback. "Sophie sent her a photo of the three of you having dinner with that woman from the cruise, the one from Canada," he explained. "Rachel didn't handle it well. She lost control. Rhonda and I found her in the bathroom. She'd cut." "Oh God," I murmured, the weight of it settling heavily in my chest. "I'm so sorry to hear that." A mix of emotions overwhelmed me, sadness for the mother of my children and the pain she carried, but also a sense of detachment. Rachel's choices had led her here, and though I wished her well, I couldn't allow her struggle to pull me down. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know," I offered. George placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Thank you, son. I just thought you should know." After he left, I spent the evening deep in thought. Though sadness lingered, I couldn't ignore the sense of relief I felt as I moved forward. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, a chance to rebuild and find happiness with Liam and Sophie. As the weeks passed, life settled into a new rhythm. The kids adapted to life without Rachel at home, and I found my stride as a single parent. My boss remained flexible with my schedule, and I even looked forward to the day Liam could take on more responsibilities, like driving Sophie to school. Nikki, the woman from the cruise, and I grew closer over time. Our shared conversations and laughter brought a sense of lightness back into my days. It wasn't about rushing into something new but finding companionship and connection when I least expected it. Rachel's betrayal had shattered the foundation of my life, but the pieces I picked up formed something stronger. With every passing day, I saw the beauty in the life I still held close, my children's laughter, their resilience, and the growing bond one shared with Nikki. Moving forward didn't mean leaving it all behind. It meant carrying the lessons, knowing that peace sometimes emerges only after the storm.